If you find yourself repeating frustrating patterns in your relationships, be that family, romantic, or business, it's probably because you've gotten out of sync with your individual core nature. One of the most powerful tools to address these issues is archetypal framing. It's easy to find ourselves acting under the assumption that we should be doing certain things because somebody we look up to does those things. However, if we do not share the relevant archetypal patterns with that person, this is a recipe for endless disappointment. It's possible, and in fact very likely, that we are a different archetype from that person. And so trying to follow in their footsteps is unlikely to work out very well. As individuals, we have unique archetypal patterns that are multidimensional. To navigate complex situations, it's best to first get a clear sense of our archetypal patterns. This means going far beyond simply rationalizing something because it makes sense on paper. It requires listening to our instincts, getting in touch with our emotions, and tuning in to our source of inspiration. By attending to all of these archetypal needs, we can invite opportunities and synchronicities into our lives such that we're constantly engaged and fulfilled in meaningful interactions. And we can avoid the dysfunctional patterns that get us stuck. So, how can we determine our archetypal patterns to help us navigate complex situations with confidence? Should we use an archetypal modeling system? And if so, which one? There are many archetypal modeling systems that can be very useful if used appropriately. Each of these systems has various trade-offs between simplicity and usability versus nuance and power. At the end of the day, what's most important when using one of these systems is to take it as a source of suggestions to experiment with and explore rather than as a deterministic map or a predictive oracle. Be skeptical and use your discernment. The fact is that the most valuable thing about using these systems is the archetypal reframing itself. It's not so important that you resonate with every single suggestion in your chart. What's most valuable is discovering a new way of framing something that you've been stuck on. Archetypal models are the most powerful tools we have for doing this. If your chart tells you something you find hard to believe, test it for yourself. None of these systems are perfectly accurate, and they're all complicated enough that it's very easy to find yourself lost in ambiguities. Even still, there are plenty of situations in our lives that are so complex that reducing them down to just a few ambiguities is still a huge step forward in terms of getting clarity on our issues. Again, none of these systems are perfect, and you should approach the space with a healthy dose of skepticism and test any suggestions you get to come to your own understanding of your archetypal patterns. That being said, it is important to practice good spiritual hygiene when using any of these systems. If you're using a system that involves filling out a form, it's very important to be as honest as you possibly can be in giving your answers, and as generous as you can be in interpreting the questions on that form. If you're using a system that's based off of your birth time, it's important to be as accurate and specific with that as possible. Even if you find it hard to believe that your archetypal pattern could be predetermined based off of a seemingly arbitrary moment in time. I suggest experimenting with multiple archetypal modeling systems to discover which one you feel is most helpful for you in your particular situation. Each one has a slightly different use case it's best suited for, and each individual has preferences about which is easiest to use and to navigate. I will say that I personally resonate most strongly with the human design system, and I find it to be the most powerful one to use in my coaching sessions. This was a bit of a surprise to me, as it's a system that's based solely off your birth time and doesn't require filling out any sort of a form. At first glance, this would seem to be a less scientific approach to things, but for a number of reasons, that's not particularly true. I find the systems that require filling out a form to be inevitably riddled with personal bias and ultimately provide much less provocative and interesting suggestions to consider. Even if you disagree with what your chart says, it's good to know that it's not simply reflecting your own biases back at you. The exercise of navigating new territory and exploring possibilities you've never considered before is the most valuable aspect of using these systems. And again, at the end of the day, you need to test all these things for yourself to come to your own understanding of your archetypal patterns. If you practice good spiritual hygiene and stay open to the possibility that the system could help you discover something about yourself, I think you'll find some powerful insights in your chart, and you may find it opens up a whole new world of possibilities.